Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of SpeakEasy with Eric and Cory. Last week, got you to do a little episode on battery backup. I got to pepper you with questions. I thought I might get you to go down some rabbit holes where you totally nerded out, but you did a good job. I feel like you answered the questions. You kept it very to the point, and I was impressed. I was happy.
I was happy with my, watching it back. You always watch these back and go like, did I do a good job? And it was fine. It was fine.
Yeah, of the two of us, like I'm the one that you force to generally talk, and then you're more of the if you make me guy. But
Right.
I don't think that should be the case anymore. I think you have graduated.
Now I'm a star.
You're a star.
Great. Well, I'm excited to turn the table, and I'm going to put you in the spotlight today. So, I answered some technical questions last week, but I think our viewers need to know how to finance the stuff that we talked about last week, right? You want battery backup? How do you pay for it? So I think this is going to be the episode that our viewers need right now.
So just so we're clear, you get to tell them last week the thing that all of them want, which is battery backup, and I get to talk about the thing that nobody wants to talk about, which is how to finance it.
Yeah.
Got it. Check.
Yep.
All right, I'm in.
Cool. So I've got some questions here, similar format of last week. I've got some questions here. How do you want to do this? You want me to just go right into it? What do you
Go
want?
for it.
Okay. All right. So financing, difficult topic. We need to understand this. In the solar space, financing is a challenge for some. So my first question is, does paying cash for a system still make sense?
Yeah, so, just generally speaking, right? You're buying a solar system, you've got some choices. Cash is always one that people think about. And then beyond that, there's the more traditional methods of people take monthly payments through the form of a loan or a lease. So, it's a good first question because I feel like you should start here. So the question was, does it make sense to pay cash for a system? So let's first start by saying, I'm always surprised how many people pay us in cash, right? When you're a kid, you always wonder, like, how am I going to afford life? How am I going to afford a house? How am I going to have savings to do all those things I need to do? And then when you become an adult, you realize that if you're responsible, it is, in a lot of cases, possible to have some cash on the sidelines to do something like this, a project. But I don't suspect that the average person does. I still don't make that assumption. But I'll say this. If you do have money set aside, let's just say it's set aside for an investment, right? And maybe like most people right now, you're thinking the climate for the last couple of years hasn't been great and I'm concerned about hoarding my cash and I don't want to invest it. But maybe all of a sudden now, you're thinking there's a change of presidency, there's a change potentially on the impact of cost of goods for consumers. Like maybe you're thinking this is the right time to invest. If you have money on the sideline that can be invested, let me just say it like this. You will be hard-pressed, if not mission impossible, to find something that is a better investment than solar if you don't have it. So let me just say it like this. Like people who do solar generally here in California, right? We look at an average of the projects that go through with us, a 6 to 7 year payback period, meaning whatever cash you're putting out, you're going to receive that money back in 6 to 7 years in the form of your savings on your electric bill plus the tax credit incentive you get. So 6 to 7 years is pretty darn quick. That's in most people's plan for how long they plan to be in their house.
So are there like other investments in that you know of that are going to give you a similar rate of return?
So what's the average person thinks about the retirement that they have, right? And if you're looking at your retirement, like most people do a couple times a year, you're just hoping that thing says 8%, 10%, because that's what financial advisors tell you. If you get 8-10% a year, you're probably on track to do well. You're going to have years where you get 10, 15, 20%. You're going to have years where you go negative, right? But average 8 to 10. So solar return on investment right now, when I review proposals, it's not rare for me to see 20% ROI plus.
Right.
So just to clarify what that means, right? So if you were to invest in the stock market, and let's just say you make 10% on your investment, you still got to pay taxes on that. So you pay your 30% taxes on your income, and then it's more like, 7%. 7% versus 20%. This is why you're not going to beat it. I have
untaxed returns.
Yeah, there's no tax on savings on electric bill. That 20% ROI is untaxed.
That's killer.
I talk to a lot of financial investors because I'm curious what their opinion is. And the ones that are being honest with me, there's nothing that can touch 20%. right? They might not want to tell their clients like, hey, don't give me that, $30,000, $50,000 to put in your portfolio that I'll manage and make 2% on.
They want you to give them the money.
But they can't touch that.
Right.
If you don't have solar and you have an electric bill that's meaningful and you have the cash to invest, that is your first priority.
Very interesting. From a financial perspective, somebody with a lump sum of cash might not be thinking about this, but I think that's a really good approach.
They're not going to view it as an investment, right? Because it's just kind of a stretch.
Right.
Your utility bill is that. It's a utility. It's a monthly recurring payment. To look at it as an investment sounds a little bit contradictory. So
it's kind of strange because this is written like the utilities increases year over year is historic. You can see all of that, and then at that point it's just math.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy to justify this.
I'll get into this a little bit later because I have a feeling I kind of know where you're heading with some of these questions, but I will just say that the average person is content with just sticking their head in the sand and saying, I'm not comfortable moving forward. So therefore that's the path I'm choosing. But yeah. I don't think that's advised. So to answer your question, yes, paying cash, absolutely. If you have the ability, makes so much sense.
Yeah, a lot of sense. Okay, let's move on. What has changed in the solar financing space that's causing people to question if it still makes sense? I mean, I've heard this, I've seen this. People are thinking that interest rates are too high or whatever the case is, and they're saying solar doesn't make sense. What do you say?
Yeah, this one, we did a solar is a scam episode, right? I might lump this into that feeling because financing, not just in the solar space, but just in a lot of consumer loan space, it turns into this thing where you have to make it appealing to people. So even if interest rates are great, you still have to how do you offer a 0% interest loan, a 0.99% interest loan? Because it's a hook. People see it and they feel like they're getting a deal. Let me just say this on the record. There's no magic money. Right? Nobody has access to the secret fund that is 0% or 1% when everyone else has 5% or 6%, whatever it may be, right? It's all an illusion. It's a sales trick. It's a tactic. It's a way of getting people's attention. So what's changed? What's changed is, and I'm going off memory here, but pre-COVID, so was that 2020? So pre-2020, the Fed interest rate was 2.5%. And that was the basis for how consumer lending was impacted, right? And then it gets marked up from there based on consumer risk. It got all the way up to about, I think, 5.5% during COVID. Let me take that back. It got up to 5.5% after COVID. So what happened was it went from that 2.5% down to 0.25%. Because during COVID, right, they were just trying to get anyone to continue spending, right? They were trying to keep the economy alive. So sorry for skipping that step, but it went all the way down to basically zero. And that was kind of the 2020 to 2022, I think. That's when borrowing money for anything made sense. It was so cheap to borrow. So we got into this habit of just having this in our back pocket, this 0% money, this 1-2% money.
Yeah, financing for nothing.
Right. Amazing, right? People got mortgages sub 3%. I did. I think you did too, right? We all took advantage of this.
More pools built during that period than ever before, I'm sure.
Right. But then as soon as, COVID was over and we can debate the decisions we made during that, how we pumped money into businesses and gave people checks, right? That created some inflation. And in turn, we tried to cool the economy a little bit. We tried to slow down inflation and it got up to 5.5%. That's where we got to. All of a sudden now interest rates or mortgages where I think they peaked around 8% or somewhere in that range, right?
Something like that.
They were trying to get people to stop spending money. And it worked, right? And it worked in solar pretty effectively where people are like, we don't want to do these loans anymore.
Right.
So, that was the big thing that we experienced was, right? Unfortunately, that happened kind of right overlapping this time period with the utility changes that we talked about, right? The net metering 3 and needing to have batteries, increasing the cost of systems. So that created a huge hurdle for us. But what's been happening this year? September, we had a 0.5 point reduction from the Fed. In October, we had another 0.25 point. And then coincidentally today, December 18th, we had another 0.25 point reduction. So we're down a whole percentage point on the Fed in terms of the interest rate. So we're trending in the right direction. But to answer your question is that cheap money went away. And people who are very comfortable borrowing money to finance a solar system no longer are looking at as this is a no brainer. Let's go ahead and finance. So let's assume your answer to that first question was, I don't have cash. And in the second question, you're like, I'm still not sure if borrowing money right now is a good idea. You're going into this holding pattern. You're thinking like, I'm going to wait. This is not the right time.
But back to the first question, right? Like there's almost no better investment than solar. So why are people hesitating because of these interest rates? Because it sounds like you're saying, does the interest rate overcome the benefit of?
So two different ways of thinking about it. When you're talking about cash, what did I speak in terms of payback period? 6 to 7 years, right? You didn't hear me talk about monthly payment. But as soon as you finance something, it becomes payment of my electric bill versus payment of my loan.
Sure.
And what happens when interest rates go up, right? The payment gets higher.
Right.
So that's really what changed, was just having this higher monthly payment. And the tax credit that you get from solar, a lot of people now are having to apply that tax credit to their loan, right? To buy down essentially the principal balance of that loan. So the monthly payment is lucrative still. So that's another huge change, right? Like people used to be able to take a loan out on solar, keep the tax credit, and they still had a payment that was maybe less than an electric bill. Now you're probably only achieving that if you put your tax credit towards it.
Sure, but we're talking about monthly payment versus return on investment. And even if you finance a system, that it's still just as lucrative or more lucrative than any other investment out there.
Sure. So it's not, it doesn't necessarily devalue it, but I think what people understand is there's a cash price and there's a finance price. The finance price has fees in it, right? So it's a bigger balance that you're trying to pay off with an interest rate attached to it. So it just makes it a little bit more challenging to justify, but I do just feel like the mechanics of loans and high interest rates scare people away.
Okay. Fair enough. What about like pros and cons? Let's deviate from loans a little bit, because there's other ways to finance solar, right? So, third party ownership, loan versus third party ownership. What are the pros and cons, and what should our viewers or consumers be looking at? Does a loan make more sense, or does third party ownership make more sense?
Right. And people are probably hearing you say third party ownership.
What
and
is
they're like,
that?
what the hell is that? Right. So third party ownership most notably is leases, but it's also an acronym PPA, which is power purchase agreement. So long story short, what that means is you don't own the system, right? Somebody else owns the system. It's just operating on your roof and you get some of the benefits of it. So look, this is a really hard thing for me because I have my own personal biases, but I'm going to try to approach this in a very unbiased way. So
speak easy.
Just be comfortable talking about it.
Right.
So loans traditionally, right, have been New Days and a lot of more local high rep, high service type contractors. That's been their preferred approach. And I think the reason being is that there's been this strong belief that this is what's in the best interest of the consumer. You take the tax credit. You own this system. When you sell your house, you get the financial benefit of it, right?
Sounds great.
It does sound great. So this is why companies like ours have traditionally always stuck to this and kind of avoided third-party ownership leases and PPAs.
We're trying to give all the benefits to the end user.
Well, that's the intent, right? Like we don't want you to lose out on any of the benefits.
Yeah.
Right. But there is a place, like anything, right? It's kind of like energy, right? Solar's not the only solution. There's nuclear and oil and coal and all the things. There's different needs for each of those. And it's the same way in solar financing. I don't think cash is the only answer because it's not practical. Loans sometimes don't appeal to people, and PPAs have their place and leases have their place. So I think your question was go through the pros and cons.
Pros and cons. Yep.
So I'll do this as honestly as I can. So look, let's just go through a couple bullet points, I guess, and I'll do my best to compare and contrast. Because look, I do feel like this is where the rubber meets the road here. This is where people get confused. Like, okay, solar makes sense, great investment, but I have to finance it because I don't have cash. So both of these things sound confusing, and I don't know which one to choose. So, all right. So let's start with a term. How long is this financing? So PPAs and leases are traditionally always about 25 years. They're very long, right? Loans have varied a little bit. The first loan I got when I did my first solar system was 12 years. That was very typical. Now most solar loans are 25 years. Why? Because we're trying to get that payment to be less than the utility bill. Most people wouldn't be interested in a 12-year loan that's 50% higher than their utility bill.
Right.
So in terms of the term, 25 years is pretty typical right now. So I would say those are both, you're in this for the long haul, right? That's why you're doing it, because it makes sense on a monthly basis. So no advantage or disadvantage there. It's kind of like a tie, I guess. In terms of the length that you're in on this thing.
Sure.
Second question, right, is monthly payment. So that's pretty front end priority for most people. Like, well, what's happening? I have a $500 electric bill. What's my payment going to be with a loan or a lease? I would say day one, the lease or PPA probably wins the majority of the time. You're going to have a lower day one payment than a loan. But what people may or may not realize is that leases and PPAs traditionally come with escalators, which means every year they go up a fixed amount. It's something that's in your contract. Right now we're seeing anywhere from like 1.99 to I think as high as 5%. And usually the salesperson would say, well, utility bills go up on average 5% a year, so your escalator is only 3%, so you're ahead of the curve. Your bill is going up less than the utility company.
Okay.
Not factually untrue, but the point being is loans don't. Loans do
Once
not
you
have
lock
an
it in.
escalator, right?
Sure.
So that payment might be, going back to the $500 a month example, let's just say the lease payment is $350, the loan payment's $400. That lease payment might go from $350 to $375 to $400 to $425. So at some point you're above that $400 loan payment. So lowest payment day one, probably a lease or PPA. But eventually there's going to be a point where those two lines intersect and that third-party ownership is more expensive per month.
Okay, so it's fair to say that you might start out higher with a loan, and lower with a PPA or a lease, but at some point you would end up higher with the PPA or
I can't believe you stuck me with this topic that's this boring and this dry. You got to talk about battery backup.
Yeah, I'm trying to come up with
I'm over
jokes.
here talking about
How about
financing.
How about this? And I don't have a joke queued up, but how about a drink?
Cheers.
Cheers, bud.
Gotta reach. Mike's.
Awkward.
Did we do a good job there, producer Taya?
Producer Taya? Yep.
I think that's the first time we got Taya to talk on the podcast.
Not the first, but not the last.
So look, this is really interesting stuff. And I do think that talking about this is important, but it is boring, but it's a huge roadblock for people.
It's not boring to me because I feel like this is the important stuff. This is what consumers probably need a little bit of guidance on, and they don't get it. And maybe they get it or somebody tries to explain it, but they probably need some sources, some third-party sources, right? Maybe there's somebody watching this podcast that isn't working with us. They're working with another solar salesperson of some sort, and they haven't been explained this particular topic.
It gets glossed over.
Right. And they need a little bit of information. So this is really, really valuable stuff. You say it's not funny or it's not pertinent, but this is so important.
All right, I'm back.
Making this final
where
decision.
did I leave off here? Pros and cons. So we got term, we got monthly payment, right? So we addressed those. I'd say the next is the total cost outlay over the duration of the term.
Which one's more expensive?
Generally speaking, because there's that escalator, over the 25 years, you're going to pay more in a lease or a PPA.
Okay.
The total monthly payments added up over 25 years, or they're going to exceed a loan.
So,
go ahead.
Is it fair to say, like you're saying that generally speaking, because of the escalator, you're going to end up more expensive with the lease? But let's say there's no escalator. And at the end of 25 years, you've paid the exact same amount, PPA, lease, or a loan. Which one at the end of 25 years would you rather have?
Whew. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a very pertinent question. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to answer it with my last couple points I'm going to make, because I think that's where it really shakes out.
Sure.
Because it's a good question. Because there are, I'm not trying to be biased here. There are advantages and disadvantages on both sides of this thing. The lease and PPA have gotten a worse reputation historically, but they are becoming more significant, and I think there's a reason for it.
Really depends on a person's situation, right?
So I guess maybe there isn't a definitively yes or no, but I'll try to explain it through the next couple of things. So
Okay.
yeah, total cost outlay, generally more expensive for a lease or PPA during those 25 years. But I'll throw this out. The average person doesn't stay in their home for 25 years, right?
Right.
They move, what is it?
I
5
think
to
it's
10 years?
every 5 to 10 years is,
Right.
maybe we'll say the average is 7, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe 7 or 8 years, somewhere in that range. So if your plan is to get solar, stay in your house 7 years, and let's just say that you still have lower payments on that PPA than you would have had on a loan, do you care that the next person that you transfer the PPA to is going to have the increasing payments that's going to make this thing more expensive than a loan?
No.
You probably wouldn't, but I don't know. That depends on each person. And do you know definitively that you're going to move from your home in 7 or 8 years? But yeah, that's a point. Even though it costs more over 25 years, are you going to be there to actually pay that?
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense.
Next, let's go with tax credit. So I think a lot of people are confused on the tax credit associated with solar, and that's probably a reason why maybe a lease or PPA has a pro check, because you don't have to deal with it. So easy math, if you had a $30,000 solar system, there's a 30% tax credit, right? So you're going to have a $9,000 tax credit that's coming to you. So that's $9,000 that if you qualify for, which the majority of people do, don't bite my head off. There are people that don't qualify, but the majority of people that we talk to do. They get this Yes, Cory?
But my question is, okay, I always get a tax return at the end of the year. So because I'm getting a return, I don't qualify for the federal tax credit, right?
Yeah, I think the simplest way, and I don't want to oversimplify how the tax credit works, but really what matters here is, let's use an example. Someone makes $100,000 a year, and let's just say they fall into a tax bracket that is 15%. So they owe how much in federal tax? Hey, look at you, not a math guy. So they owe $15,000, right? Whether you have paid zero of that throughout the year or all 15 of it through your withholdings of your paycheck, it doesn't really matter. That solar tax credit of $9,000 can be applied to it. So if you've paid nothing, you've paid 0 out of 15, well, guess what? Now you got 9 applied, you owe 6.
Right.
If you paid all of it, you paid all 15 through your paycheck,
you get $9,000
you get that $9,000 back. You'll get a check from the IRS. Beautiful thing.
So we're talking about tax appetite, like how much you owe in taxes. It doesn't matter how much you get back, because that is determined by how much you've paid in.
Correct.
And how much you owed.
Correct.
So tax credit, just because you're getting a return doesn't mean you don't get it. That's I feel like a common misconception.
Got it. I'm not going to go further in the rabbit hole because I want to stay on task.
Sorry.
No, it's a good point, though. People misunderstand that.
Mm-hmm.
So the point being is the tax credit, I've always wanted that. Prior to owning New Day, I did solar through New Day, the company that we own, and I wanted that tax credit, right? I did a loan. I took that tax credit. I did not apply it to the loan. I think I paid off credit card debt, whatever I did, right? I applied it in some meaningful way to my life. I wanted that. But there's a lot of people that either maybe don't have the tax liability, maybe they're business owners and they don't have tax appetite per year. They don't generate taxable income as they report to the IRS, or maybe they just don't want to necessarily have to deal with all of it and they just want a lower monthly payment. You leasing company, you take the tax credit. Just give me the lowest payment you can.
Yeah.
So it really depends on you as a person. And I think that's just hard to say it's a pro or con. It's just what would you like? Do you want to have that money available to you, or would you rather someone else deal with it and you just get the lowest monthly payment?
Yeah. It sounds like it could be easier in some cases.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Another thing I think is important is maintenance. So this is probably where I would say where leases and PPAs get the biggest pro. So if you have something that is cash or a loan, you own it. You, Cory Johnson, own that system. Woo. So let's just say that system has batteries on it. And those batteries have, I don't know, a typical, call it a 10 to 15 year warranty on it.
Okay.
How long did I say, just to check, how long did I say the average term of a loan is?
25 years.
Right. So from year, call it 10 or 15 through 25, at this 10 plus years, if those batteries die, who's paying for it? In that format with cash or loan?
Cory Johnson.
Yikes. Right. And we don't know the cost of batteries in the future. Those could come down. They will come down. It probably won't be that big of a financial burden. We also know how long these things last. They're relatively new, especially the tech that's going in. Like Tesla batteries, and we use Enphase. A lot of these big names that are out there, there's not 15 years worth of data saying how they're going to last.
Sure.
So they very well might last 25 years. We don't know. Point is, Cory Johnson's paying for it in a cash or loan scenario.
Well, what about a PPA or a lease?
Well, you don't own it. So it's something that's wrapped into it. They will replace it. So that's a pretty big advantage, right? Let's just say your Tesla battery dies at year 11 because it's a 10-year warranty, and you're stressed out. Man, this thing just crapped the bed. But no, they're going to cover it. They're going to come out and replace it, and it's no outlay of cash for you. That's a pretty nice advantage.
Yeah, obviously that's a contract thing, but that sounds interesting. I like that.
Yeah. Now I will say this as a counterpoint. People that I've heard selling leases and PPAs like to say no maintenance. That is the appeal. With a loan, you have to deal with the maintenance of the system. While that might be true in the way I described, that you don't have to pay for it, Cory Johnson doesn't have to pay for it. You still have to deal with the headaches of it. The system is down. You're probably gonna have to coordinate with whatever installer installed it, or the financing company that the lease or PPA is through. They're gonna have to work with the manufacturer. Okay. Your system value's offline. You're still gonna be angry about this. This isn't a woohoo, set it and forget it. This is still an inconvenience to you. So I don't know if I buy into the no maintenance. Maybe no maintenance, but still headache is the best way to say it.
So there's a potential there, systems down, not producing anything. Therefore, you don't have a lease payment, but now you have a Edison payment or a utility payment of some sort because the system's down, and the urgency is really on the company that owns the product to service this thing.
So I don't think you teed me up, but I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk about it.
No,
so,
I didn't.
What's the difference between a lease and a PPA, right? I don't think we covered that yet. Did we?
No.
So a lease is generally a fixed payment. So they're calculating what that payment is per month. Let's just say they determine for your system size, it's $300 a month.
Okay.
You pay that every month, irregardless. And my understanding and my experience is if that system is down, they're still going to bill you that $300 a month. You could probably complain and say the system was offline. Maybe they reimburse you. But point being is that payment is it's expected to arrive at $300 a month. A PPA, power purchase agreement, that is a mathematical formula based on how much the system produces times a rate.
Okay.
So just like you're billed a rate of power, a cost per kilowatt hour, the same math is applied to a PPA. So let's just times what you produce times a lower rate than your utility is usually what it is. So there is a difference there. So I think you had mentioned like power's out, you're not going to have a bill. That's more of a PPA, the way that I view this. So
sure. Okay. Good point.
Sure, they're not going to bill you for the PPA because there's no production.
Right.
But you know who is going to bill you?
The lease.
No. Well,
yes. The utility. Utility.
The lease will bill you, but the utility is going to still bill you. So, and again, maintenance free, worry free. I don't think so.
Yeah,
there's still very much a disadvantage here when something goes down.
System down in any scenario, loan, PPA, lease, the utility is like, gotcha. So then it's like, how serviceable is the system? Lease, PPA, maybe slower to react, especially a lease company. But a PPA, they want their money, and a loan, hopefully you have an installer that is willing to back you up.
Right. This is dragging a little bit, but I feel like this is important information, so I don't want to skip these last two I have in mind. The next is your service expectation, meaning when something does go down in your system, because look, this is construction, this is electronics, things go wrong. Mm-hmm. In the typical format that we're used to, cash and loan customers, when something happens with the system, usually not necessarily a defect of our work, but just electronics, they fail.
Products fail.
Right?
Yeah,
How quickly are we out there? We're out there pretty darn quick to respond to customers, sure. Right? We had a instance recently. Tell that story.
Yeah. So customer down, product failure, and they had no power in part of their home due to this. And so 11:30 at night on a Saturday evening, we're out at a customer's home to bypass the failed component to get them power to their house.
This was battery backup, right? So they had no power. They were like totally stranded, close to midnight, calling us saying, help
help us.
And what did we do?
We helped them.
We got them back online.
Yeah.
What would the process have been if that wasn't a cash or loan system?
Yeah. So when we don't own the system and the solar or the customer doesn't own the system, you've got to go to the owner of the system and say, hey, there's a problem with your system. Would you like us to fix it? And wait for their response, because they're responsible for the costs of repairs and things like that. And I don't think they want to pay for an urgent service on a Saturday evening, 11:30 at night or whatever. They're going to say, oh yeah, sure. Let's wait till Monday. We'll pay your normal rate to go fix that. That's where you're at with that type of thing.
And I guess to be fair, I should say, just because you don't choose a lease or a PPA, you shouldn't expect that your contractor is going to go at 11:30 p.m. Even when I heard that one of our guys did that, I was like, really? Like you were out there
nice
at midnight?
Job. Yeah.
So yeah, good on him and good on us. But I don't know if that's necessarily a normal expectation, but I think it highlights the point is that we could. We intend to take care of you, and we could. Yeah. Versus if it was third-party ownership, we would have had to got approval to get out there and service that system.
Yep. Kind of wild.
So for us and a lot of companies like us, taking care of our customers in that way, that is such like a high priority of how we service them. And it's a huge concern of mine that if we do increase the amount of systems that aren't owned by customers and we have to get approvals to go out and service them, that service level drops off and customers aren't happy with it.
I think that's a pretty big, when somebody is making a big purchase like a solar system, their expectation is going to be that they'll be taken care of. If the thing's not working, somebody's going to help, and we've both been in the industry a long time, that it tends to have better service on the loan, the customer owned, the end user owned product.
I do feel like this is a general statement that the contractors that are doing primarily loans and cash, they tend to have more of a focus on being in business long term and servicing customers. Yeah. Not a definitive rule, but it just does seem like a general acceptable expectation.
That's fair to say. Yep.
And the last thing I have is, because I want to end this rant at some point, is customer experience, which is kind of like where the service expectation was leading, right? Like customer expectation for me means I own this thing 25 years potentially. There's a lot of things that could happen. Maybe I decide I want to pay this thing off, right? I don't want to have a loan anymore. I don't want to have a lease anymore. So is that feasible? In both the loan and PPA lease format, I do feel like that has gotten better, where if you want to buy it out, you can. So let's call that exact thing a tie for the sake of this. Okay. You sell your home, right? Maybe you're hoping to get more value out of your home. Which one does that work for? You got a lease or a PPA, you're not getting any value.
Right.
As rudimentary as appraisers are when it comes to solar, they're not going to give you anything for a leased solar system. But a cash or loan, they're getting better, right? We have programs we work with where our customers are getting advised on, there is a mathematical formula now for how much this will add in their home's resale value. So that is a huge plus for owning a system, that you will be able to sell your home. I feel confident saying you will be able to sell your home for more money with a solar system that you own.
Okay.
Whether you did a cash or a loan.
So at the end of question 3 there, pros and cons. There are pros and cons for both. It really depends on the customer's situation, and they need to make that decision. But having an installer that is willing to go through the pros and cons with them in their specific situation, I think is key there, it sounds like.
Absolutely. What else is there? So we've sold our home. Let's just call it, I don't know, what's the likelihood that the installer of record that you used is still around to answer your phone call? Again, there's no guarantees. It's construction. It's a trade. These companies go out of business all the time. But again, I do feel like the installers that are using cash or loans generally have a more long-term mentality. They're trying to be in business for their customers. They're trying not to grow to the moon. There tends to be less greed involved in that equation. So I would say, again, generally speaking, I would have a higher degree of confidence that a loan or cash project, that installer is still in business. So And now I'm going to answer your question from earlier. Earlier, you asked me, what would I do, like all things equal, right? If there was a no escalator, the payment was the same. Me personally, I would still choose to pay cash or a loan. The reason being is those advantages down the line, whether it's selling my home and getting additional benefit or just wanting someone to pick up the phone and be in business and come service my system when I need it, I don't see how I could say there's not a clear-cut advantage to using the ownership model for that.
That investment is benefiting you versus someone else.
Correct.
In the equation.
Correct.
All right. Let's get to the last question.
We're not done yet?
There's more to be said. So how would you advise someone starts the process if they're deciding to go solar? How would you pay for the system? So we've identified that there's different ways to approach this. What's the first step? I'm going to get solar. What do I do, Eric?
All right. I'm going to give you, I think I have 4 steps here. So I'm just going to give them to you all at once, and you can feel free to, at the end, add questions.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, I want to understand what is my current obligation to the utility company? What do I pay them per month? And what does my future exposure look like?
Okay.
Meaning my bill is $500 today. I plan to be in my house 10 years. So what's the reasonable expectation of what that payment could get to?
That's
Start
great.
there, right? What's my exposure, right? So that's step 1. Step 2, can I pay for this thing in cash? Do I have the ability to just pay for it and get the maximum benefit with no interest rate attached, no loan fees, just pay for this thing with that 6 to 7 year payback and 20% potential ROI? That's step 2. Step 3, if I can't pay cash, I'm looking at analyzing what makes sense to me, a loan or third-party ownership, right? We gave some pros and cons, go through that. And hopefully at that point, step 3, you're done, you've made a decision. But if you get to the step 3 and you're still thinking, I don't know if this makes sense. All right, well, the step 4 is really important for you. You don't get off the hook. You don't get to put your head in the sand like I said earlier, right? I said I'd come back to that. Like, you have to analyze the cost of doing nothing. The utility company right now is going up almost 10% a year. You do not get to just say, I don't like that financing interest rates are 7% or whatever they are, because that's not a good enough reason. The utility bill doesn't go away. It will show up every month and it will go up every year. So that's my last advisement step there. If you get through all that and you still think solar doesn't make sense, I'll ask you if you think the utility company makes sense. Do you trust a monopoly? Do you trust they have your best interest in mind? I don't think so.
I have to admit, I'm a little embarrassed to say that the very first thing you said was your exposure. I don't know if I've honestly heard that before, and I love that. I'm okay. Like, let's estimate I'm going to be in my house for 10 years, and let's take the previous 10 years and look at how what the average rate increase per year that the utility has done, and extrapolate that over the next 10 years where we are and go forward 10 years. I've never really heard that approach before. Let's look at that number, and chances are you're not going to like that number that you just spent with the utility, and it might be less than or equal to a solar system in 10 years. That's an excellent approach. I really like all of those initial steps.
So look, I said this in the front end of the episode. This is not the most exciting episode. This is not something that everybody is attracted to because it's sexy. But this is the reason why people don't go solar, even though there's a 20% ROI, better than any financial investment you could do with your money. So I hope people listen to this. I hope they get something from it, because honestly, there's a lot of people out there that right now are like, I don't know how to get solar, even though people are telling me it's a great thing. So hopefully this gives a little clarity. Tried really hard to be unbiased and to be clear. Cash, loan, third-party ownership, all of those are better than sticking with utility company.
You might say that this isn't interesting, but I think that losing money is not interesting.
Nobody finds that interesting.
So I think this is pretty important. Maybe there weren't as many jokes or laughter in this episode as others, but I would argue that this is more important than that.
I agree. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.